Welcome to the Wild Ones Middle Tennessee Chapter YouTube channel. I am Richard Hitt, the chapter president. You are watching a recording of the presentation given during our November 23, 2020 meeting. We were delighted to have Roger McCoy, the director of Tennessee's Division of Natural Areas, as our speaker. Roger's topic was current research and conservation action for the federally threatened white fringeless orchid in Tennessee. We pick up the recording just as Roger is beginning to introduce himself. I hope you enjoy.
To be here. I wish we could all be together, but at least we're all, we don't have to drive out in the dark and you're all in the, comfort of your own home. And so, get up and grab a cup of tea or whatever beverage you might need. I'll clarify the Director of Conservation Natural Areas thing. I see my colleague Phil Hodge joined. And about a year and a half ago under this administration, I was asked to also oversee the Division of Archaeology. And I got to give credit to Phil, who's our state archaeologist, because he runs the show, but that's what it is. I have no training in archaeology. My training is in botany with a master's degree in forest ecology. I went to graduate school at Southern Illinois University, and I did my undergraduate there too. And if you're not familiar with that part of Illinois, someone gave a big yes. I don't know if we have a Saluki in there in the chat, but that's great. That's the unglaciated part of Illinois. So really floristically and physiographically, it's much more aligned with the South. When I was a student, we used the floor of the Carolinas and the southeastern floor of wetland plants and that sort of thing. So it's the more forested area. There's a national forest. But since 1998, I've worked in the Division of Natural Areas, starting first as the database manager, which was an enjoyable position, handling all of the rare species data that you're going to hear a little bit about, and then took some different levels. And then the Haslam administration was appointed director. And so here I am. I'm a director of a division, but as my colleagues who've joined the call can tell me, my passion lies in field botany. And like anything, sometimes that pulls you away from what you love, but it's still great. So it's great to be part of it. Okay, Division of Natural Areas. Well, there's our logo down at the bottom. You'll see the different physiographic provinces. You'll also see the Tennessee coneflower, which was the first plant listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It was delisted in about 2012, in part due to the Division of Natural Areas. And I'm not an entomologist, but Dr. Hill, jump in. I believe that would be the zebra swallowtail there. But anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's no problem with that. All right, so what are we about in the Division of Natural Areas? Let's see, why am I not? There we go. Okay, so we are dedicated to the protection and proper management of native plants, animals, and natural communities across Tennessee. And along with managing a statewide system of 84 state natural areas, we're the leading authority regarding the location and ecology of Tennessee's rare species. So really, it is the Division of Natural Areas that authoritatively speaks in terms of the location. So just wanted to show a few different species, animals, although TWRA legally lists animals, we track them. Plant communities, the cedar trees you see there are not from a Middle Tennessee cedar glade, but from one over in Decatur County on the Tennessee River. And then rare plants, pines ground plum, Astragalus bibulatus is a very rare species known from just a few locations in the world. But it's always good to kind of, I think, to talk about like how we came into being. We don't operate in a vacuum. Every part of our lives has some influence. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of the division that predates me. Okay, so this isn't about me. This is about those who came before us. And if you know anything about the history of conservation in the United States, it's built on the shoulders of giants, the men and women who did the work, and many people who maybe we don't even know about. So I'm going to start way back over 100 years ago, before the flu pandemic, before COVID-19. This was in 1917. This is a picture of, or this is actually 1915, the Ecological Society of America. So if you've been, if you went to school and majored in biology, you may have seen ESA's journal, and you know about them. And their first president was a man named Victor Shelford. So this was more of an academic type of institution. So there's Shelford there. And Shelford realized pretty early on that although they were studying and teaching about natural history in the United States, that many of the sites, even then, were degraded or destroyed. So he was having, he was based in the eastern United States, and he was having a hard time finding representative plant communities to take his students to. So he formed what was called the Preservation of Natural Conditions of Ecological Study. And later on, he published a naturalist guide to the Americas. And in this guide, he identified sites in need of preservation. And for the next few decades, the committee sort of worked to save natural areas for scientific purposes. So their goal was kind of science and the study of science. And it's hard for me to imagine that, with the population, what it was in 1917, and that there were still struggling to find representative communities. And I think, like, wow, we have 100 years of population growth and interstates and development. And boy, to see what they got to see in 1917 would really be a treat. So Shelford was actively lobbying Congress against such things as mining in our natural monuments. And this didn't sit well with the academic crowd. So in 1945, ESA, the Ecological Society of America, they passed a referendum that prevented the society from taking direct action on conservation purposes. Although it did stipulate that the society could encourage preservation through other agencies by providing information and advice. And so, I think we see this today. I mean, scientists might know a great deal of things, but maybe they're not the best public speakers, or maybe they don't have the connections. But also there's members of their agencies that are just like, well, we're not an advocacy group. We're about studying science, or we're about native plants in landscaping. And so even like in your own organization, I could see that this being a potential conflict. Well, that didn't sit well. The idea that they were being censored, if you will, or at least restricted on what they were doing didn't sit well. So in 1947, that group from ESA broke away, and they formed what was called the Ecologists Union. They said, we want to advocate and we want to promote, whether politically or legislatively or whatever, natural areas. And I doubt if you've heard of the Ecologists Union, but you've certainly heard of the Nature Conservancy, because the group changed their name to the Nature Conservancy in 1951, I believe. So this photo shows volunteers planting a trail near the Mianus River Gorge in New York. And that was the Nature Conservancy's first acquisition. And no doubt you've heard of TNC, the largest nonprofit conservation organization in the world. So from the 1950s to the 1970s, TNC realized that, we've preserved some neat places. We've preserved some forests, maybe some waterfalls, and particularly up in the Northeast, New York and that sort of area. But have we preserved those elements of biodiversity? That is, are we really protecting the most imperiled species? And the director of science at the time was Dr. Robert Jenkins. And what Bob Jenkins came up with is really revolutionary in the terms of natural areas preservation and natural heritage. And he decided that there was a need for science-based decisions of biodiversity conservation. And so TNC formed what was called the Natural Heritage Network. And our division of natural areas was formed by the Nature Conservancy. In the early 1970s, they had a contract what was then the Department of Conservation. And they formed the Natural Heritage Program in 1975, I believe, within Department of Conservation. And that is where we are. So if you've been to a hike with me where I've been on a TNC preserve, TNC is more than just about preserving land. I mean, their legacy of this methodology cannot be overstated all over North America and in the Caribbean nations. And TNC continues to partner on a number of our projects. So today, the Division of Natural Areas is a member of what's called NatureServe, and that in the early aughts, NatureServe, that sort of the data arm from TNC, was separated, by TNC's blessing to form more of the data side. And this is just a map of all of the member programs, including Tennessee. So like many programs, we have both a natural areas and a natural heritage section. So then I'll talk a little bit more about each one of those. So the 1970s also brought about a number of environmental legislation. The late 60s and 70s, you had the Scenic Rivers Act, you had the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, but also was the Natural Areas Preservation Act of 1970. And if you're doing your math, you're going to realize that 2021 will be the 50th anniversary of the act. Every person in this photo is still alive. We have made contact with a few of them, including Governor Dunn, and I reached out to one of the senators in the photos, and I haven't heard back yet, but I trust I will. So we're hoping for a big statewide event. May 4th is when the act was signed. That's a Tuesday in 2021. So May 1st, which is a Saturday, look for events all across the state of Tennessee on our state natural areas, whether they're managed by our division or state parks or national parks. And there's a nice picture of Governor Dunn on the left, and on the far right is Dr. Elsie Quarterman. And if you know a little bit about the history of ecological study in Tennessee, Dr. Quarterman was certainly instrumental. I had the opportunity of meeting her once before her death at the delisting of the Tennessee coneflower. So sometimes it just takes getting the decision makers in the field. And in this case, getting Governor Dunn to the old growth section of Savage Gulf helped sway him on the Natural Areas Act. Today, we have 84 state natural areas, approximately a little less than 130,000 acres are designated. Our division, the Division of Natural Areas, manages 32 of those, which is about 14,000 acres. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the management. And I mentioned the Natural Heritage Program was created in the early 70s. And the Heritage Program, their first goal was to help guide natural areas selection. This is a map of our designated state natural areas. It's scattered across the state. And if you see the cluster in Middle Tennessee and Davidson, Wilson, and Rutherford counties, that's really driven by the number of cedar glade sites that our division has protected and manages, because there's a number of endemic plant species. So not all of those are state parks, but we manage directly. And we have state natural areas on federal lands. We have state natural areas that are part of the state park system. We have state natural areas even on private property. You'll hear just a little bit more about that. One of the state natural areas just outside Nashville is Couchville Cedar Glade State Natural Area, which protects a significant population of the Tennessee coneflower, which is a strict endemic to Middle Tennessee. And the Nature Conservancy was really active on this acquisition. And this wasn't a single acquisition. This was many small pieces taking place over the course of, 25 years or so. And the last parcel we added was only about 10 acres. And TNC had an anonymous donor to help with that. Another key piece of legislation for the division was the Rare Plant Protection and Conservation Act, signed by then Governor Alexander. And this authorizes the Department of Environment and Conservation, in which we're based, to legally list species as threatened, endangered, or special concern. So the Division of Natural Areas is the agency that lists those species. And this also allows us to seek Fish and Wildlife Service funding, funding that helps for research. This is Andrea Bishop. And Daryl, I know you're on the Zoom. You took this photo years ago when we were out looking at Dahlia foliosa out at Cedars of Lebanon. So thank you for that. I can't quite see my full screen. I think you're credited for the photo. If not, forgive me. It's also funding to help acquire lands. One of our most recent natural areas is Sherwood Forest in Franklin County. This is a 3,000 acre tract, and many funds we were able to gather, but in part we were able to gather what's called recovery land acquisition funds, because there is a federally listed animal, the painted forest coiled snail, as well as a federally listed plant, Moorfield's leatherflower, Clematis moorfieldii down there. And this is on the escarpment of the part of the properties on the plateau proper, but most of it is the Limestone Cove area down into the Crow Creek Valley there, where the community of Sherwood is. We do work statewide, not just on state lands, monitoring species, looking for rare plant communities. And if you've been up to the Big South Fork in that area, you may have recognized these cobble bar communities, which harbor a number of interesting plant species, some of which occur nowhere else in the world. New state natural areas are created by an amendment of the Natural Areas Preservation Act of 1971. And normally how this works is the division goes out, finds a place, seeks property, acquires the property through the state, and then we designate it as a state natural area. And our most recent act was signed into law this year, which expanded a number of state natural areas and designated two new state natural areas, Walnut Knob in Smith County, which protects a rare plant, and then the Sherwood Forest that I mentioned to you earlier. I was proud to work on the Window Cliffs State Natural Area, and I think I'll be leading a hike there on May the 1st, 2021. If you haven't been there, it's a pretty nice site. With some rare communities, rare plants, and an interesting geologic feature. So even the state natural areas that the Division of Natural Areas manages might have a little bit of infrastructure. These aren't wilderness areas. We can, according to the Act and by our management plan, have some facilities. In this case, this is a small canoe launch area in Claiborne County at the Powell River Preserve State Natural Area. So this preserves a rare seep community and a rare orchid up on the slopes behind that guardrail, but it's on a river. And so Lisa Huff of our division worked with the locals and Trout Unlimited to establish this parking area, and as well as with TWRA. We also intensively manage some state natural areas. So again, because a lot of these sites are small patch, because there's been so much development pressure, because we don't have the disturbance regimes that were historically known, such as fire and large grazers, we manage these sites. And in this case, this is May Prairie State Natural Area in Coffee County, and I believe I'll be leading a hike there in September with our botanist, Todd Crabtree, or one of our botanists. Caitlin is our other botanist who's on the call here. This site is one of definitely the top 5, I would argue maybe the top 3 most significant botanical sites in the state of Tennessee. Now, you go out to May Prairie and there's lots of neat rare plants and pollinators and other things. But this is a wet prairie. This is a deep soiled prairie. And without management, we would have some serious problems. So if you look at this site, this is just a beautiful, lots of flowering plants and grasses and, just a wonderful, aesthetically pleasing site. But if you look closely, you'll start to see red maple popping up. And there they all are. If we walked away from May Prairie for even just a few years, this site would be degraded, it would decrease in size, and ultimately we would lose these coastal plain disjuncts. I think in terms of number of rare species, May Prairie is the most significant state natural area with over 20 state listed species. And so we burn it and we treat the red maple regularly. And I could go into the whole ecology of this site, and some know this much better than I do. We also intensively manage our cedar glades, and this is a site at Flat Rock State Natural Area where we pieced together a great preserve with the Nature Conservancy, and eastern red cedar was encroaching, and we've contracted with folks to remove the red cedar. We also burn these sites. In fact, tomorrow I'll be on a prescribed burn at Cedars State Natural Area. So we do some burning, and sometimes, so from this area to that picture is just about 16 months later. Let me go back to that. That's what it looked like. We removed the cedar, we added fire, and this is Echinacea simulata, one of our state listed coneflowers. So if you get a chance to hike at Flat Rock, it's outside Murfreesboro. This is a good site. This is an aerial image of Stinging Fork Falls State Natural Area. And in this case, years ago, the gorge was preserved. This is in Ray County, Tennessee, so on the Cumberland Plateau. And we then added a buffer to the area that had a significant amount of loblolly pine. So loblolly pine is native to Tennessee, but just barely, but it's been planted for commercial purposes in plantations. So the pines you're seeing there are not native, and we have an active timber harvest going on, and we've done some creative accounting, and we're able to retain those funds year to year beyond a state fiscal year, and that took some doing. And then we can reinvest those in management of this site, where we plan to have some shortleaf pine restoration, which is a native species in decline. Some of our state natural areas, like I said, are privately owned. This is Otney Hollow State Natural Area in Lewis County, and along with the federally listed Tennessee yellow-eyed grass, it protects the large flowered grass of Parnassus, Parnassia grandifolia. And in this case, it's privately owned, but the state of Tennessee has a conservation easement on the property. So the level of protection on this privately owned site legally is the same as you might have at Radnor Lake State Natural Area. So, but it's just not a public land or open to the public. Along with state natural areas on private property, we also have a number of state natural areas on municipally owned properties. And this is the Old Forest State Natural Area in Memphis. So if you're familiar with Memphis and you've been to Overton Park or the Memphis Zoo, this is really close to the zoo. And this is a small tract, but protects a remnant old growth area. And that's me on the right with the land manager of the site on the left. And again, so this is not a state property, it's city owned, and the Overton Park Conservancy manages the site. We have natural areas on federal land. This is Twin Arches State Natural Area within the Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area, which is a unit of the National Park Service. A lot of people don't know about the Big South Fork, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of my favorite places in the state of Tennessee. If I had to choose between the Roan Mountain area and this, it would be a tough call. Two state natural areas within this national park unit are Honey Creek State Natural Area and Twin Arches State Natural Area, and they predate the national park designation. So we had designated natural areas within an area that was at the time owned by the Stearns Coal Company, and then later on became designated as a state natural area. And thank goodness plans were not successful on damming the Big South Fork or this amazing public land and those cobble bars and rare species would be under a lake. So the Division of Natural Areas, like I said earlier, we're the leading source of data. We provide some access to that data through our online. So you could go to our website, you could look up rare species by quadrangle, by county, by watershed, or by particular species. You can download that information into an Excel spreadsheet and use that. And this is really a good way to do a review of a project, is to look at what's in the area, what could be impacted. So much of what we do in the Natural Areas Division doesn't even get noticed because it's behind the scenes, and it's biologists entering the data, and then our data manager providing reviews. And when I say reviews, this is an example of a review. So think of all of the projects across Tennessee, the gas lines, the 5G towers that are going in, the fiber optic cables, the highways. And those agencies and those private consultants come to us, and we do those reviews, hundreds and hundreds of them a year. It really is a big time commitment. And if I could add only one position to the Division of Natural Areas, there's a need, much need for all that we do, but it would be to assist with this a little bit more. We also help inventory sites that don't ever become state property. And let me explain that a little bit. This is Todd Crabtree, one of our botanists, and quite a few years ago now, he and I were contacted by a landowner who owned about 1,500 acres on the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. So high elevation stuff. I was surprised that there was this big of a tract of private property up there. And we did some inventory of the site. We did a report. We realized it would be too big for our division to manage. We just didn't have the resources. And given the proximity to the Cherokee National Forest, this site was added to the Cherokee National Forest. And I'm real proud of this. So it's not a state natural area. It's not part of our state land holdings, but our division got to have a small role in helping preserve what we refer to as the Laughlin property. There's a nice view from the top of that. The Natural Areas Act also allows for non-binding agreements with private landowners. So this is Andrea Bishop of our division, or who retired from our division, monitoring Price's potato bean, one of our federally listed plants, private property over along the Tennessee River. And this individual has a registry agreement where he is agreed to manage this section of his property as a state natural area, in part to help protect this species. So with that sort of concludes the overview of the division. And I guess this might be a time, Richard, we could entertain some questions or whatever, however you want to proceed.
Sounds good, Roger. I just learned a whole lot of stuff I didn't know before. Thank you. We've had some questions come in, so I'll go back to the beginning and take a look. Oh, yeah. So Joanna, it occurred to Joanna and I that the May 2nd or May 1st, 2021 celebration will possibly be up against the Cedar Glades Festival at Cedars of Lebanon State Park. It's usually the first Saturday in May. So it's nice to have too much stuff going on, all this stuff going on. You're going to have some collisions, but
yeah, that is. But we have if you go west of Highway 231, that's all designated state natural area. So I trust that that'll be part of the celebration. And Manager Buchanan, there is the new manager at Cedars of Lebanon, is aware of that.
Yeah,
that's a good point. We always struggle with getting too many things going on, and I know you all love our Cedar Glades, so I appreciate that.
That's a wonderful area. We appreciate the protection that's gone in over there. There were some questions about the Sneed Road SNA. We understand it's being delisted, or whatever the term would be. And so I was trying to answer some of those questions, but the question was, how did the natural area become so degraded? And I didn't want to start guessing that it was the developer and the HOA or whatever. So I thought I'd let you address that.
I'd be happy to address that, and it was the developer. So what happened is that site was purchased a long time ago by the Nature Conservancy to protect a small population of the leafy prairie clover, Dahlia foliosa. This is in Williamson County. And it was set aside when that development happened. Since then, when the developer degraded the site, there was a financial penalty to TNC. And since then, we have invested those funds. Again, this predates me at sites like at State Natural Area and other areas that protect leafy prairie clover. So in our latest Natural Areas Act, and this had never been done before, and we was not something we took lightly. We had 3 state natural areas that we de-designated, and I didn't want to open that door, because it could come up in the future. But those 3 state natural areas have something in common. One, they would not be designated today based on what's there. 2, they've been degraded. 3, the landowners, or in 2 of the cases, not so much with Sneed Road, are not in compliance with the act. And then finally, the state has no legal ownership or easement on those properties. So they were designated a long time ago without any sort of ownership or easement. And we thought, rather than water down the act with these sites that have been degraded, like Sneed Road, like Short Mountain in Cannon County, which had commercial timber harvesting going on, we put in the act to de-designate those 3, and Sneed Road was one of them.
Thank you, Roger. Did that clear up all the questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if you have more.
I have a brief question on that Dahlia foliosa. I was told it was recently seen at the Sneed Road location. And since it's being de-designated, would it be of value to obtain those plants or to do something to preserve that strain? I don't know the right word there.
Well, it could be, Laura. I am unaware that it was seen there, and I think the first step would be to contact our division and let us know that that was documented. I've been to the site, and a number of people have been to the site over the years, so that would be pretty significant news. And we do work with folks who preserve the genetic material, and that is certainly a possibility if indeed the plants are still extant.
Very good. I'll follow up on that with you.
Thank you.
So Roberts asks, just curious, but do you know about how old the tree is in Memphis where you were standing near?
I have no idea. West Tennessee trees grow pretty fast. There's deep soils and plenty of rain, so it might not be as old as you think. But we do have some old trees on state natural areas, and including some trees down in Savage Gulf that date from the early 17th century. But that one, it would be just a guess. I don't know that that's been cored or not.
Any other questions? So on some of the Cedar Glade, on some of the state natural areas, they're clearly open to the public with built trails, parking areas. Other state natural areas have locked gates that you have to jump over to get inside. And other state natural areas, like the one you mentioned in Lewis County, are closed to the public. Are there any other variations to that?
No, I think you've covered it. There are those that are full access, like Radnor Lake and Frozen Head, where you drive in and there's a parking lot and a visitor center and that sort of thing. And our website explains the different levels of access on each one of those state natural areas. So if you're curious about a site, you can go there. And almost all of them are open to visitation. Some of them it'd be very easy to get lost in just because it's just a piece of property with no trails or signage, but you can look at our website and get that information.
Right. Yeah, the one in Lewis County that you mentioned is actually a fen, and it's hard to get through that grassland without damaging the plant material. So um, let's see, another one I can think of is Overbridge near Flat Rock. And as I understand it, that's accessible to the public. You just have to jump the fence to get in.
There might be a walkthrough or it could be a climb over, but yes, that is open to the public. There is, and it might just, because we don't have staff at these sites like a state park does. If we had a full open gate, sometimes that lends itself to, other sorts of activities that we would prefer not to happen. But I'd be happy if there's a specific question about a site, you could email me or Jason Miller of the Division of Natural Areas and find out.
So one of your more popular sites would be Taylor's Hollow, which is, I think, owned by the Nature Conservancy. And to access that site, you're supposed to get permission from the Nature Conservancy, as I understand it. However, in practice, it seems that people just go up there and hike as they want.
Yes, that site is closed to the public. It is a privately owned site. But you're right. I mean, again, without someone standing right there, it's very difficult to prohibit that. And I'll be leading at least 4 hikes there in April. I just was putting some of those together. Caitlin, who's on this call, led one, or was going to lead one in 2020, but I think we wound up canceling our hikes due to COVID. But there'll be a number of opportunities to go visit that site, and it is open by appointment. If you're interested, you can contact the Nature Conservancy or me. But if you've been to that site, it's very small. And if that site were full public access, I would guess in about 2 years, we would have degradation of that small area with those wildflowers.
Some of the trails there are just about 18 inches wide, so you can't actually pass somebody without stepping on vegetation. But the last time you and I were there, we had this surprise party show up that just drove down to hike there. So if you haven't been to Taylor Hollow, Roger has this terrible job of having to lead so many hikes there in April. You should try to sign up for one. And in order to do that, you need to jump on it quickly. Do you still maintain an email list of people where you send out the hikes that you're going to be leading?
Yeah, so what I do, if you've been on a hike with me before, is I keep a running list, and I'll email folks when we publish that at the beginning of January. But our Division of Natural Areas website will list all of those, and you register and do that as well.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think we can move on to Platanthera integralabia, and please correct my pronunciation.
Well, it's Latin, so there's no wrong way to pronounce it.
That's my line.
How are we doing on time, Richard? This is about a 20-minute presentation, so I don't want to keep people, longer.
It's a Zoom meeting, so people can click the leave button whenever they need to. But
That's true. That's true. It could just be me and Randy Hedgepath at the end, just talking about Platanthera. Well, I'll get the clue if everybody drops off. How's about that?
Right. No, I think you're doing fine. 20 minutes is good. That'll put us a few minutes past 8. We'll have time for a few questions, and we can call it a night.
All right. Let me try to share the old screen again here. Let's see.
And while you're doing that, we can all mute ourselves.
All right. How we doing? Does that look good?
Great.
I can't. Okay, good. All right. So Platanthera integralabia, the white fringeless orchid. Todd Crabtree works in the Division of Natural Areas, and Jeff Call is one of our colleagues at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And really what this presentation is about, and this is what I had in mind when Richard first contacted me, and then after chatting with him, he thought, it might be good to do an overview of the division. This is just kind of a feel-good summary of all the exciting work that's going on, not just from our division, but from botanists and conservationists all across well, really the Southeast. So quick acknowledgements, you can read them there, and you can see there's many folks from academic to other land managers to our park rangers who have really taken an interest in this site. Okay, Platanthera integralabia. I can't see you all right now, but you can unmute yourself. Has anybody seen this species other than maybe my colleagues who are on the call?
I've not seen it. I've just seen the sister species, Nivea, in May Prairie.
Okay, which Nivea in Tennessee is more rare than integralabia. I've never seen Nivea in flower. So whenever we do a presentation about a particular species, it's always good to give a history of the taxon. And by taxon, that is the unit. So in this case, it's a species, but if we were talking about a variety or subspecies, that would be a taxon. The plural is taxa. So just a little bit of botanical history here. The species as we know it today is Platanthera integralabia. Our first recorded collection of the species dates from 1840 by a botanist named Bucklea, who has a genus of plant named after one of our rare species, Bucklea, that sidebar, in Georgia. So he collected something that we call today Platanthera integralabia. That was not the case at the time in terms of it being named. So in 1910, another botanist named Ames recognized a form of the species called, the species at the time was Habenaria blephariglottis. And he recognized a form that had a non-fringed lip. So integralabia means entire lip. And so a form is not quite yet a variety, it's not quite yet a species. So in 1941, another botanist came along, Carrel, and he described Habenaria blephariglottis, which was a known taxon, a known species at the time, variety integralabia, so a trinomial. So you got genus, species, variety. And in his Latin description, which up until 2012, all new species had to be described in Latin. Today, there's 2 languages that can be used. But in his Latin description, he wrote, I'll give you the English translation, the plant differs only in a specific type of lip, more or less intact. So very similar to the known species of Habenaria blephariglottis, but he felt it was warranted to recognize it at the variety level. In 1975, there was a book published by Luer, Native Orchids of the United States and Canada. He was a botanist at the New York Botanic Garden. He elevated the taxon to the species level. The genus name changed to Platanthera, and the type locality, that is the location from which the type specimen was collected, and a type specimen is the specimen upon which the description is based. So if you describe a new species, you have to have one single type specimen and say, I'm describing it based on this. The type locality was in McCrary County, Kentucky on the Cumberland Plateau. So today we have Platanthera integralabia on the left, thanks to a nice photo from State Park Ranger Marty Silver, and Platanthera blephariglottis on the right. And you can see the difference in the fringed lip of blephariglottis with the entire lip of integralabia. The range of white fringeless orchid, Platanthera integralabia, is primarily the Cumberland Plateau, exclusively the southeastern United States. A few species over, or a few locations over in northeast Mississippi. We've looked in adjacent West Tennessee and have yet to find it there. A few outliers in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Tennessee, and if it shows up on your screen, the orange color in North Carolina indicates that the species has been extirpated or historic from the state. The NatureServe global rank is a G2, G3, which is globally threatened, And basically, the lower the rank, the more rare it is. So G1 is the most rare, G5 the most common. Our state ranks or subnational ranks are listed there. So S1 in Kentucky means extremely rare. In Tennessee, we considered an S2, which is vulnerable. The habitat of Platanthera integralabia is these seepy systems of the Cumberland Plateau. In this case, this is a Cumberland seepage forest, is the ecological system by NatureServe. A couple different associations, so that's a little bit more specific. So in terms of plant community, so you got the system, which is a little bit broader, include the Appalachian forested acidic seep, and then the Cumberland open acidic seep woodland. But basically, if you're wandering around, ambling around the Cumberland Plateau and you see large ferns like the cinnamon fern, if you see sphagnum moss, cardinal flower is a good indicator, cowbane is another one, it'd be worthwhile to stop. And notice the kind of the open nature of this. And by the way, this is Eugene Wofford, who retired from University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Another picture of the seep community. In this case, we've got Viburnum nudum, which is the shrub on the left, and fern and royal fern, often an overstory of red maple or black gum. And these communities in Tennessee can have other state listed species, such as a Hypericum, Hypericum nudiflorum, another orchid, the yellow crested orchid, Platanthera cristata, the Virginia chain fern, Woodwardia virginica, and then, although not listed in Tennessee, another one of our grassive Parnassus, Parnassia acarifolia, is listed in Kentucky. So these are the sorts of areas where we look for Platanthera integralabia. So there is the species, notice the sphagnum moss, notice the fern, and that's what we would key in on in searching for the species. The species can also occur in very open habitats. I noticed Cooper Breeden joined the call, so I'm going to put you on the spot, Cooper. He is in the slide on the right. This is in Bledsoe County. Cooper is with the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance and has helped us on a number of projects. The same power line, maybe 200 yards away, the slide on the left, is Adam DeTillo, who's a botanist with the Tennessee Valley Authority. So this is the Cumberland Wet Mesic Meadow and Savanna. These are successionally dynamic communities. And what I mean by that is without some sort of management, they will revert to forest. So in this case, the power line management is benefiting the species. And just look at that picture on the left with all the cardinal flower and just all the other forbs. These are just beautiful linear prairies, if you will. They have numerous grasses and just really, really diverse. Here's another picture of a few of us in a power line. This is at Fall Creek Falls. This is probably the second largest occurrence in the world for Platanthera integralabia. You can see all that white in the foreground. And this is a site, again, that TVA manages directly. They are out there with herbicide. It sounds crazy, managing for woody encroachment, and we work really closely with them, and we're thankful for them. So that's a background of the species. So what are we doing to help preserve it? So first off, a few years ago, our division got a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a habitat model, and Todd Crabtree of our division, using Geographic Information System, developed this model. And out of it, he looked at certain types of geology. So how we do these models is we have known locations of white fringeless orchid, and then we look at on the ground what's around there, based on the data layers we have. And then you take all those data layers and project those out onto the landscape and say, okay, these other sites have similar characteristics. And so now let's go see if we can find white fringeless orchid. So first off was the geology, which is Pennsylvania sandstone and Cretaceous sands and Cambrian shales. Then Todd looked at the terrain with a certain percentage of slope. So if you notice on the left-hand side of this little arc map screenshot, it's less than 2.5%. So not too steep, not too flat. So something where water can run off, but be retained for a certain amount of time, not a high gradient stream. Then he also looked at the curvature. So is it concave or is it convex? So we need some sort of bowl-like system to determine if this sites have habitat. Now, one of the things that we had difficulty with the model is it's hard to discern past land use. So you could have all the right geology, all the right slope, the stream situation, that sort of thing. But if the site had been, grazed or heavily impacted or mined or converted, that's a little bit more difficult. But the models work well on predicting habitat, not necessarily predicting species, but predicting habitat. Saying in ecology that all models are wrong, but some are useful. In this case, this is a useful model. So we developed a model based on known occurrences, but prior to that, back in like 2011, I think we got a grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service before it was listed at the federal level. It's currently federally threatened, to monitor all of the known occurrences. So I had the grave misfortune of having to drive all over the Cumberland Plateau and find these sites, which was just wonderful, I have to say. We were successful in finding some had been destroyed, and so that way we could update our database. And all of these data get fed into our rare species database. So we visited all known occurrences. Some of the sites, based on our observation, over time would decrease in terms of plant numbers when the forest grew around them. So if you have the plant in a forested system, those are often stable, but in these successionally dynamic sites, the numbers can decline rapidly. So, for example, I first visited this site in 2005, went back in 2008, look at the number of shrubs that are there, and the numbers declined. Oops, excuse me, I'm going the wrong way. Other areas where maybe a power line was abandoned, so you can see kind of running from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner. This was a power line near the town of Spencer, so just a little bit east of Highway 111. And this was a significant site for white fringeless orchid. And then the power line was abandoned. Okay, so it reverted back to the owner, and the area grew in forest. And as a result, white fringeless orchid probably still exists, but we've had a difficult time finding it. So this is just a good example of, if you remember my just previous presentation, that many of our rare plants occur in some sort of rare habitat. We have a lot of forest in Tennessee, even though a lot of it's been cleared. But those open areas, those wetlands, those glades, those seeps, those are often the most significant sites. So here's what the site looks like, or looked like in 2015. So not only did the power line grow up, but then that we wanted to stay open, and then everything else got cleared for agriculture. So this site is degraded. I don't know that I would totally write it off. There could be some root material or seeds kind of hanging out in there. Other impacts that we observed to the species are ATV use, illegal ATV use. So this is at Franklin State Forest in Franklin and Marion County. Wild hogs can degrade these seep habitats. They're moist, they're squishy. It seems like a great place for a pig to root around in. And this is one of the wild hog traps that a park ranger at Fall Creek Falls State Park has installed. And there's game cameras, and then they get notified on their phone and that sort of thing. So this is a case where we have a non-native, large mammal species from Europe, really wreaking havoc on some of our native plant communities. Monitoring can include long-term monitoring, like at Star Mountain on the Cherokee National Forest. This site has been monitored over a number of years, and it's the biggest occurrence range-wide. Just a nice shot of give you an idea of the abundance and the nice maturity of this forest. So this is a little bit different. I've been talking about the power lines, the open areas. You're going to see a little bit more about this, but this one on the Cherokee is in a completely forested area. So we would not advocate really any management here other than keeping the hogs out of the site. This is just a graph to give you an idea of the variability of the flowering plants. So the red is the flowering plants that actually get counted. And you can see how we had a really good year in 2019. We did not monitor it in 2020 because of COVID. I was able to get out with some of my colleagues in 2019, so that was nice. The green is the vegetative plants. And you might say, well, gosh, why are there so few vegetative and so many flowering? The vegetative plants are not a complete census. It is a sample of a portion of those where the flowering is, I don't know if it's fully complete, but certainly more comprehensive. So it's not like there's, 4,500 flowering plants and only, what would that be, about like 480 vegetative plants. That this is just a sample, but it gives you an idea how the vegetative plants are relatively stable. So the species persists, but certain years, whether it's a light gap or a good moisture year or whatever, really can promote flowering. And this is the difficulty with orchids. So we talked about searches with the model. We also do a lot of management. This is Meadow Creek at Savage Gulf State Natural Area. This was an area that was a former timber company land that got added to the state land about 4 or 5 years ago. And we've done some burning there. In fact, just last week, we have burned a large unit, and we have some shortleaf pine restoration. So these pines all back in here, the native loblolly pine. The site was cleared of hardwoods prior to state ownership, planted in loblolly. And Randy, I think you're on the call. You've probably been here. Numbers are looking really good. So the loblollies got cleared out by the timber company. We did some treatment of some of the encroaching red maple. Staff put fire to the ground. And today, this is kind of what it looks like. Just a nice, big, open grassland area. And you can see the white fringeless orchid there, really abundant. I mean, this site is a knock your socks off in terms of numbers. Rangers at South Cumberland helping monitor. And again, if you can see my cursor, those are all white fringeless orchids there. And these are really diverse and pleasant sites. A little bit about the graph. So 1991, the species was first found, or reported at least, at Meadow Creek, but with no numbers. So I don't know. All it says is flowering plants. So that's why it says 0. Certainly there were more than 0. State Park and Division of Natural Areas botanists went back and said approximately 1,000 plants. Well, since then, we have monitored the plants. So the other data points on the graph are actual counts of flowering plants, and you'll see that sort of fluctuation. Why the spike? Well, I can't say for sure because we want to be careful of, not assigning a causal effect to a corollary effect. And my PowerPoint's not quite working like I want it, but the pines were cleared off, so that opened up a bunch of sun, and then we started treating and did some burning. And this was 2019 numbers at a little over 1,600. And the 2020 numbers I don't have on this graph, but we had just under 1,800 plants. So there's the management definitely isn't harming it and appears to be helping the flowering. And why are we so concerned about flowering? Well, if the plants are flowering, we're going to assume reproduction. And there's other studies going on to confirm Another neat project that was funded by the Fish and Wildlife Service through our division is molecular barcoding. So a lot of times when we're wandering in the field, we see these strap-like leaves and we're like, I think that's white fringeless orchid, but I really don't know because it could be one of 3 or maybe 4 species, so we can't say for sure. So we contracted, with Dr. Ed Schilling of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, to do molecular barcoding. So we can now send him portions of this leaf and he can determine which species of Platanthera, which is the genus, which species that is. And the next few slides, I'm going to stretch a little bit beyond my knowledge of botany. I'm a field botanist and ecologist, so my explanations may fall a little bit short, particularly if you have a background in genetics. But in short, he looked at the number of base pairs between different species of Platanthera. So on the X and Y axis are the different species of native Platanthera in Tennessee. And he looked at Ciliaris, which is a fairly common, albeit lovely species, and looked where are the markers different. And in between integralabia and Ciliaris, he said there are 3 points of being different. So there's 3 base pairs that are different between integralabia and Ciliaris. So what that means is when he runs the genetic work, and so there's about 650 base pairs, and I'm only showing the latter 100 or so on this graph or on this slide. So these are the genetic base pairs of Ciliaris. Boom, 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 boom. We know exactly what it is. Remember the ATCG from your genetics class. And then when the base pair differs, we know there's something up. So there's 3 base pair differences between white fringeless orchid, Platanthera integralabia, and the more common yellow fringed orchid, Platanthera ciliaris. I can't show the other base pair because it's earlier in the graph, but in this case, he has genetic material and there's a difference between these 2 base pairs. And so he can say, hey, at base pair 628 and 650, there's a difference. So we can tell what species it is solely based on the leaf. This is one of the few genera of plants where, well, I guess there's others, but really we just cannot tell the different species of Platanthera. We have a guess, but we cannot definitively say what species we have unless we see flowering plants. So some of the other studies going on. Another study funded through the Fish and Wildlife Service is to the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And this is a photosynthetic and herbivory study, and Dr. Jennifer Boyd and her students are looking at that. So at her research, she found that at the same sites, so you know orchids scattered across range wide, but at the same sites, white fringeless orchid had a similar light response to other individuals, whether in the canopy or the shade at the same site. So if you had 2 plants, one in the shade, one in the canopy, but at the same site, they had a similar light response. Highlight sites, so like those power line sites, differ in the photosynthetic response from the forested sites. So in between sites, there is a difference in photosynthetic response. So what does that mean? And this is what's kind of cool when the academic research really touches on the conservation. It means that reducing woody density in open sites, so if the site was historically open, would likely be beneficial because those plants have a different photosynthetic rate versus going into a forested site and opening the canopy. So this does have implications on how we manage our species or the habitats. She and her students also looked at her studies, and in that they enclosed some areas to see kind of how things were being impacted by herbivores. They had different controls of cages and different size of fencing where deer and rabbits and stuff could get through. Because anecdotally, we have seen some grazing of the species. Collection and propagation is important as it relates to sites that are being abandoned. What I mean by that is this is a TVA power line. The power line was abandoned. TVA no longer needs it. It's reverting to the private landowner. Most likely the landowner is not going to spend the time and money to manage this open habitat. So these plants will likely decrease or eventually be gone. So with the Atlanta Botanic Garden, they collected the plants, loaded them into a van, sped quickly away with a rented van loaded with federally listed plants, headed down to Georgia. And this is Jason Ligon, one of the botanists down there, doing some tissue culture, grew the plants out, and then those propagules can be inserted back into other sites for reintroduction. So we've got monitoring, we've got modeling, but we also have to do some outreach. And in this case, the TVA power line that was abandoned, those plants got introduced to a site that did not have the orchids, and they were introduced there because, again, the power line was going to be abandoned. Atlanta Botanic Garden collected the plants, they grew out the plants, they introduced them to another site that was identified through the model that Todd Crabtree did, and Adam DiTillo was featured on a public radio station talking about that research. And I'm going to try, can you all still see my screen? Richard, you might have to speak up because I don't know if you can see my screen or not. Is anybody there?
We can see your screen.
Okay, so you see like I'm on a YouTube website now?
We still see Adam DiTillo.
Okay, let me try something else. Just a moment here, bear with me. Well, hold on, let me stop share. Let me share one more time. And this ends the presentation. And this was a piece on the Tennessee wild side about White Fringeless Orchid, and I'm going to show you about a minute and a half of it.
I'm not getting the sound on this.
I'm not sure why you're not getting the sound, so maybe we'll just stop it at there, and I can share the link if folks want to look at that.
Yeah, you could drop that in the chat and we could copy it before we end the meeting because it goes away once the meeting ends.
All right, I will do that. And now I apologize that that didn't work, but we will, let's see, I need to stop share. There we go. And I'll drop it in the chat. And with that, that concludes, and I'll be happy. I know we ran a little bit over, but this is the wild side video if you're interested in watching that.
Well, thank you, Roger. That was great. Leave if you need to, but if you have questions and Roger's willing to hang around, we will ask them. I sent a message out to the members in 2019 in July. We did a joint hike with the Tennessee Native Plant Society to May Prairie, and that's where we saw the Platanthera nivea. And so that occurs only in, I think it exists only in one county in Tennessee. There's an herbarium record, I don't know the date of it, in Anderson County in the far east of Tennessee. I think it's Anderson County. If you go to the Tennessee, Kentucky, let's see, what is Joey Shaw's project called?
Oh, like the online atlas or something
Yeah,
like
the
that?
Plant Atlas, the Tennessee, Kentucky Plant Atlas that Joey Shaw has put together. There's a herbarium record at UT Knoxville from this county in East Tennessee for the Nivea. But in the herbarium, Tennessee herbarium, it's only shown to exist currently in the one county whose name escapes me, but it's May Prairie.
Coffee County.
Thanks, Coffee County. Let's see what the questions were. Patty, you had a question. Do you want to, Patty Petrus, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I was just wondering if there is a particular place, time that we could see these orchids. I'm a little bit of an orchid freak myself. And then also, is global warming to do with the scarcity involved in these plants? Obviously, all of the plants above, right? But just wanted to ask that question.
So I'll start with the first one. The best place to view them, there's really no trail that goes past them, but there are a few power line sites, particularly at Bledsoe State Forest. That's probably the easiest site, but it's not like, you park and it's like you park on the side of the road and walk into a power line. And we could talk and maybe look at a time to go do that. The best time when they're flowering is August, like mid-August to mid-September is usually when you see them. I'm trying to think if there's any that you could see. I mean, they're at South Cumberland, but again, I can't think of a site where you're just sort of hiking along a trail and you go see the orchids. They're usually off trail. The next question, does global warming contribute to their scarcity? Well, they're naturally rare. And we did some climate predictive model on all of our federally listed species. And as you can imagine, most of the plants would be adversely impacted by global warming. According to the models, some would neither have a positive or negative impact. There were very few, but that would actually benefit from a warmer climate. In this case, I don't remember what White Fringeless Orchid rolled out. The biggest threat to this species is just, I would say, I mean, climate change is certainly a threat, but would be the more immediate impacts of wetland degradation.
Well, and what kind of media do they grow in? I mean, orchids aren't usually in the ground.
Well, I should back up. All of our Tennessee orchids are in the ground.
What? Right.
So these are not the tropical orchids that grow on trees. They grow in the soil. They're terrestrial orchids. Right. Orchids have and I didn't have enough time to get in, nor knowledge to get into the whole Atlanta Botanic Garden study, but orchids have a symbiotic relationship with the fungi. So orchids don't have an endosperm. So if you know a little bit about botany, you might know what endosperm is. Like if you open up your beans when you're planting your beans. So the orchid seeds are almost like dust. So there's nothing to help them germinate initially. So they don't have that energy stored like your corn seed does, let's say. So there's a relationship with a fungus. That fungus is very hard to cultivate. So when they're grown in the lab, they're grown on a medium, not too dissimilar from the way if you took microbiology, you might have, done your agar solution. I don't know exactly what the medium entails. And they sprinkle the seeds on the medium. The medium provides that energy for initial germination. And then once photosynthesis starts, they are getting their energy from the sun.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know we've kept longer, but if there's any other burning questions about orchids or other things, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
Well, I checked the Tennessee Herbarium website and I found that there are 13 Platanthera species in Tennessee. So that was kind of a shock. Mm-hmm. I've been walking around a lot of trails and only seen one.
Yeah, well, you should see if you go up on the plateau, particularly if you get in a power line or open area. Platanthera ciliaris is fairly common. You just got to be at the right time at the right place. And most of our hiking trails are in the forest. So, as botanists, we try to get out to the power lines and those open wet areas and those cut over and burned over areas. Sometimes that's where the kind of the cool things are lurking. And we have you mentioned the 13 Platanthera species. There's 50 native orchid species in Tennessee.
Well, I think in Middle Tennessee, we see spiranthes more often than any other orchid I can think of.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, most of them, not all of them are on acidic habitats.
Flat Rock's a good site for spiranthes. I'm not sure. Might be Cernua, but I'm not sure what the species are there. But I've seen those in both the spring and probably a different species in the fall. Any other questions? Roger, this was fantastic. I should double your honorarium.
Yeah, please. There was a few questions I saw pop up. If you all want, we could try to answer those, or maybe it's just time to call it a night. But whatever I'm at your disposal.
Well, if we failed you long enough, feel free to leave the meeting. But if you've got a few more minutes, Roger, we'll finish off the questions.
Sure. Is there any way to grow orchids in our own yards? Boy, I don't know. I have a few orchids in the yard. They're non-native orchids that somebody gave me. The problem is if you try to buy them, there's a good chance they were dug. So I would just discourage you from trying to grow native orchids in your yard. Folks might think they're trying to help conserve the species, but you might inadvertently be damaging it. If there are volunteer opportunities to help manage or maintain the areas, please contact us. We certainly will. I mentioned Cooper Breeden is on the call. He's with the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. And there are some opportunities, could be some opportunities to do that. Yes. So thank you. And
you have a volunteer component to our group, so we would be open to any opportunities like that.
Okay, great.
Any other questions? Well, Roger, this was really great. I appreciate it, and we can all kind of clap or stand up and
yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not like we can all mingle, and hang out at the, with all the cookies or something like we would at a meeting, right?
Right. Yeah. There's this reactions button that Zoom has down on the bottom right, but it just doesn't do me any. I don't get a feeling from using it.
I see a few thumbs up, so that makes me feel good.
All right.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for the support for conservation in Tennessee. I mean, we have a dedicated staff doing this, but really, if it weren't for public support for our parks and natural areas, we would be nowhere. So I appreciate, what you all do, and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you for everything that the Department of Natural Areas, the Division of Natural Areas does as well.
All right. Well, have a good night. Thank you, Roger. And look for our events in 2021. And we hope to see you on the trail, and we'll do some botanizing together.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Roger.
Perfect. Thanks, Roger.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks to my TDEC colleagues for joining us too.